So I would like to invite the first speaker, Stephen Turner.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to speak. Although those of you who sat out there, I can't see you because of the lights, so I don't know how many there are of you. The focus of what I would like to talk about in the next 10 or so minutes is around a project called Irene. Now, Irene is not a famous female from Manchester. Irene is a European-funded ICT project. It's about developing a roadmap for energy-efficient neighbourhoods. However, before I start to talk in a little bit more detail about Irene, the process and content, I'd like to put that into context of the Manchester Smart Cities programme. Manchester is often described as the world's first industrial city. It was the cradle of certainly the Industrial Revolution in the UK. Post-industrial Manchester, 2013, has a population of 2.7 million people and contributes 5% of the UK's GDP. It is the second largest economic area in the UK and obviously lying outside London. However, despite that growth since the decline of the 1980s, it suffers from severe pockets of deprivation in large areas of the city. And of course, that leads to associated poverty issues which we have to address as a city. So it's against that background, really, that we as a city with our partners are recasting our vision of what a smart city is, specific to Manchester. It's one really where we want to use data in an intelligent way to be able to plan, predict and put in place the infrastructure that we will need as a city to be competitive in the future in a way that both balances economic prosperity with environmental challenges and achieving our low carbon targets. It's one where we can manage the city's operation in a real time. It's also one where we hopefully can start to put data in an open source platform that will stimulate economic activity through SMEs being able to access it. And critically for us, it's about providing enhanced opportunities for our communities and our citizens to improve their quality of life by accessing services in a smart way. We have, like many cities who you will hear from, a fairly ambitious programme, a smart city programme, which does look rather like the solar system, and I apologise for that. But it's built around 5 key themes, of which the Irene project fits within one, and that is, of course, energy. So I want to talk now about Irene. Essentially, Irene is based on the premise that successful neighbourhoods in the future will need systems that maximise opportunities offered by ICT to support energy-efficient neighbourhoods. So that's essentially about creating neighbourhoods that are resilient to the impacts of energy supply and price shocks. Irene itself is about developing a roadmap, and I have a copy here. There are more copies down here. A roadmap which essentially is about how technology can support this ambition. The roadmap itself is a research and strategy document with the aim of starting to influence emerging European policy and programmes. As I say, it's in its draft format at the minute, copies here, and we welcome any comments that people may have. In terms of process, the roadmap's been put together with over 200 experts from Manchester and other European cities across a range of disciplines. And they've helped develop this roadmap through a series of workshops, expert interviews, peer review sessions, questionnaires, to develop and help us refine a range of scenarios for energy efficient neighbourhoods and developing priorities on the back of those scenarios for action. I think much of what we're talking about is what might a future neighbourhood look like and what is obviously the role of ICT in helping generate what we talked about. Irene has developed a number of scenarios as a first stage to help identify what those future trends may be. In doing that, we've addressed a number of issues. what are the sorts of future technologies which we will be wanting to deploy within neighbourhoods? What are the potential business cases around some of those technologies, and do they stack up commercially? We need to start to challenge some of the existing assumptions around governance and around some of those technologies and how they may be deployed. And we also need to start to anticipate common usage of some of those technologies, particularly around those which are already mature. As I say, we've developed 20 plus scenarios within the roadmap, and essentially those scenarios are about how we might start to scale up pilot projects in a commercially viable way. The roadmap itself isn't exclusive to urban areas, it does cover rural areas as well. It covers 8 sections. 5 of those are on the screen, about citizen engagement and citizen involvement being critical, about transport systems within neighbourhoods, of course about buildings and the infrastructure and open spaces around them, the way energy is distributed to those neighbourhoods, and of course where energy is produced and stored. That's only 5. There are 3 others, and they are the overarching cross-cutting enabling themes, which are around energy management itself, around neighbourhood planning, and around integrated technologies. So as I said, ICT is right at the heart of this roadmap. It supports the whole process, both from its inception in terms of design, right through to implementation. And for each area of the roadmap, for example, neighbourhood planning, we've started to look at the role of ICT in terms of helping start to identify some of the drivers of why we'd want to create energy-efficient neighbourhoods. Is it fuel poverty, for example? Is it about economic prosperity? Secondly, looking at some of the barriers that may exist. These may be technological, but I think more critically they're around governance. Thirdly, around the impacts. What are the impacts of deploying certain technologies in terms of democratisation of neighbourhoods? Fourthly, we start to look at technologies themselves, and this slide starts to look at what are the state-of-the-art technologies, both in the short, medium and long term, but what are the gaps that exist? We will think there may be the gaps in terms of creating those energy-efficient neighbourhoods in technology and how they might be addressed. And finally, for each of those 8 themes, we're creating a vision around why would we want to do this? Why is the investment required? Let's not do it just for the sake of doing it. As I said right at the start, the ultimate goal of Irene is really about how would we enable and create integrated planning and operation of energy-efficient neighbourhoods. The roadmap itself sets out a series of recommendations. I won't go through them all, but some highlights are we feel that to create such neighbourhoods, we need to give a little more focus on simulation, modelling and visualisation of the entire neighbourhood, the entire process, the entire fabric and integrated structure that is there. We need to develop more detailed and specific assessment models so we can actually measure in a real-time way what actually works and what doesn't work, and so we can mend accordingly. We need much better tools for managing the integration between both power generation and interconnection with the distribution systems and smart grids. And that leads us on to another recommendation, which is really the interface between energy supply and energy demand, and doing that in a much more smarter, real-time way. And interestingly enough, another recommendation is around energy brokering. How can different, for example, building owners share energy, share procurement? You'll be pleased I'm ahead of time here. In conclusion, I'd just like to say that, as I say, the roadmap here, there's copies down here at the front. There are colleagues who have been are much closer to the project than myself in the audience who'll be able to answer any detailed questions. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to hearing from the other speakers.
Are there already any questions? Only one question from our side. It's rather dark over there. But are here people also from other city councils? Anyone working in the city? Okay, then we will take the question for the next one, probably. Steffen?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me here to make this presentation. I will start by sharing this slide, which indicates an exciting new partnership between the City of Copenhagen, CEIIA, and Silver Spring. We have just concluded a one-year period of competitive dialogue coming to a conclusion and evaluation where CEIIA won the tender process and will be the partner in street lighting for the next 12 years in the City of Copenhagen. And we are looking very much forward to have a technological partnership and develop new ideas together. A few words of my city. The City of Copenhagen is not a very big city. We have 560,000 inhabitants, but in Greater Copenhagen we are 1.7 million. We are in a very positive development situation, having 1,000 new inhabitants each month, and that also means that the economic situation of the city is quite good, and there's possibilities for new investments every year. For us as a city, it's very important what the decisions have of significance for the citizens, of course. And our city council has decided some very important strategic decisions on the development of our city. Perhaps the most important one is the vision of being the first city capital being CO2 neutral by 2025. But also we have visions to be an eco-metropolis, and we have visions to be a metropolis for people. And I think actually it's very important that when we talk about smart cities, there's two dimensions. There's a human dimension and there's a technology dimension. We talk about information and technology development, but we also must integrate the human perspective. We want to develop cities which are livable for people, healthy cities and green cities. So as I told, one of the most important issues for us these days are our vision to be the first capital city to be CO2 neutral by 2025. And it's a very big challenge for the transport sector in particular, because with the growth, transport is also growing, and we have challenges to keep our targets on transport. What we did first was actually to draft a renewal plan for our traffic signals. Almost 400 intersections will have new controllers, new server, better error tracking, a communication system with open protocol, and an internet-based communication to all the 400 intersections. On top of that, we'll be able to have a system for intelligent transport. We call for real-time data. We call for optimizing of traffic signals. We build a traffic control center. We are piloting, and we are inviting companies and research institutions to participate in partnerships with the City of Copenhagen. As part of that, we need a traffic management plan. We need to know where and when modes of transport will get priority in our streets. We will develop service goals for prioritized routes for cycles, cars and buses. We will guarantee a certain travel time from point A to point B in the city, and this counts both for cyclists, cars and buses. And this is a very political issue, of course. Should we give priority to buses, cars or cyclists? So this has to be approved by the City Council by April next year, actually, 2014. The Traffic Control Center, this is in cooperation with the Danish Road Directorate and the police. It should be user-centered, and it should enable us to much better handling of planned and unplanned events influencing traffic. A few words about the way we try to develop partnerships with research institutions and private companies. We are right now running a PPI process with about 25 companies and a number of research institutions. And the key challenge we have formulated is how can ITS help the city of Copenhagen to become CO2 neutral? And there's a number of pilot projects, but basically we are focusing on two innovative tracks: intelligent street space and unified traffic management systems. Just to give one example, which is we are piloting just now. Can we develop a better communication between truck, buses, and our traffic controllers in intersections? That would mean that we can inform the drivers in the trucks to maintain a special speed in the urban area, for example 43 kilometers per hour, and then have green in the next intersection. In nighttime, we can even communicate the other way with beyond the peak hours, and then we can help the drivers, the trucks, to have green waves through the city. And that, of course, reduces the energy consumption and the noise from the trucks. We would also like to including green waves for cycling in the city of Copenhagen, and we have a challenge these days with have the right way of detecting cyclists. So part of the PPI process is also to develop ideas, improving technology to detect bicyclists by cameras, RFID loops, Bluetooth, etc. All this is empowered by a city council decision last year, giving 50 million euro in a budget agreement. For street lighting, we went through a competitive dialogue. We had 4 pre-qualified consortiums, and as I told you, CEIIA SA was awarded the contract in October this year. And using the competitive dialogue actually has been very useful for the two parties. We have, through 4 individual dialogue sessions, learned each other to know, and the private partner has understood better the needs of the city, and we have understood better what possibilities the market actually could offer the city of Copenhagen. And when we started on the contract implementation November 1st, I'm also sure that the way we learned each other, the way we work together, is very important for the implementation of the contract itself. So basically, we are talking about 12 years management and operation contract, a renewal project with 20,000 new LED lighting points, all with IP addresses, so we in future can manage our street lighting more intelligent. 8,000 new poles and 1,100 new controllers. internet-based, all of it, and giving a very significant contribution to the CO2 reduction. Actually, as part of the contract, the power consumption to street lighting will be reduced by 57% in the city of Copenhagen. Using the IP addresses of the City Light project and the IP addresses at our traffic controllers, we may build a new smart city solution on top of that. We don't know how and when, but we have the opportunity, together with the private partners, to develop new ideas. It could be smart charging, it could be integrating street lighting with traffic controllers. There's a lot of options, and we are very excited about develop this technology further for the benefit of the citizens and the guests in the city. So we are looking at real-time data in the future. We are looking at a new way of communicating between road users and infrastructure. We are looking at improved traffic information, and we are looking at some way of management of street lighting and other urban services through the internet. So, thank you very much.
Other questions? Not yet. Well, I have a question for you. The backbone of Smart City Copenhagen is clearly ICT and dealing with big data. What will happen if there is an electricity failure, code red, for a long time?
Electricity failure, then we are getting black. But I think it's very important for us that the contracts we are having, the service contracts we are having in the city of Copenhagen, both on the traffic signals and street lighting, is a combination of investments in the first period and a long time operation and management contract. So the companies combining the investment with the maintenance and operation will be interested in installing solid equipment from the beginning. And then there's, of course, as part of the contract, there's a commitment to have a certain service level. But of course, someday there could be very bad weather, stormy weather, and then we must handle that in the best way.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Laszlo with energy efficiency and social housing.
Okay, thank you, Lucienne. Probably I need to push a button here. Play. Makes sense. Okay. Yeah, Lucienne asked me what's the title of your presentation. I must admit I forgot, so I'm glad to see it here, quite big on the screen, talking about ICT energy management solutions for social housing. Yeah, I'll try also to stick to the time limits and then allow for debate and conversations between us, between each other and with the audience, of course. So just a quick slide on where I come from. So my name is Laszlo. I'm the co-founder of a consulting venturing company called Bucks & Willems Consulting Venturing. Basically, we're about 16 people based in Barcelona, and we work in the area of innovation, consulting about innovation and business creation. I would say a lot of that has got to do with open innovation, collaborative R&D, collaborative business development. We do mainly consultancy for large industries, but also cities, also universities. So basically each of the three things or type of organizations you can imagine for a triple helix innovation system to work. We also now and again develop new ventures, either with scientists or with clients or with ourselves, with consultants that then turn themselves into directors of a new venture. We've had substantial background in energy efficiency, maybe starting out with energy efficiency in buildings, and increasingly we're working also in the area of smart cities. So that's who we are. Basically, what I'm about to present to you is inspired by a couple of European projects. I think, like some other speakers here, also we have been involved in a couple of these projects. One of them is called Show It. It's really about ICT in social housing, using that to enable tenants in those houses to use less energy. And there's another project which we put together, which is called Beam Up, and that's not so much about ICT. It's more about insulation, double glazing, smart hardware that can reduce the energy consumption of social housing, how to organize that, how to implement that, and how to do that in a cost-effective, affordable way. So those two projects, we've been involved in those for a couple of years, and we've been reflecting in those, you could say, open innovation projects on, okay, where's the business case, where's possibilities for companies to create profitable business that also helps citizens. So each of these projects has got 3 pilots, France, Sweden and the UK for Show It, Sweden, Netherlands and France for the Beam Up project. So basically one thing we see in those projects is that households spend more than they need to. Basically we're not the only ones who see that, but especially our social housing company clients confirm that fuel poverty, I think it was also mentioned from Manchester, it's a real concern. And there's some, perhaps one of the tragic details that pops up if you read into that is that especially very low income households tend to have not so great deals from their utilities. So we dug into that field, and basically what I'm now going to sketch to you in a couple of slides is an idea that's being matured as we speak, I would say, within our company. And as we are very much an open innovation company, we are not kicking around ideas on our own in a small room, but we like to kick ideas around in an open space, which is really what this presentation is all about. So we see a lot of consumers are basically spending too much, and they're not even aware of how much they spend. They have a poor knowledge of what energy contracts are about, how they could change provider. They do have also very poor knowledge about what kind of rates or tariffs apply and what's the dynamics of changing. And we can see that in reality over Europe, only 6.2% of consumers actually changed energy supplier over the last 2 years, even though legislation has almost forced consumers to change in some cases in some countries. So then, of course, the statisticians can make kind of very nice bar charts like this. And there you see how much an average household could save if they would switch energy supplier for each of the countries in Europe. So you can see well, maybe we have a very good deal here in Spain. We can just save €5, or maybe all the utilities have basically put their heads together and agreed on rates. That's another possibility. But there are countries in Europe where you could save like €200 a year by just changing, and the EU average is about €107. Now, for a lot of families that might not sound like a big deal, but in low-income social housing, that would be a significant amount to be saved. So basically, why doesn't it happen that people take advantage of this saving? Well, they're poorly informed, they're not very transparent market, consumers are not very active about seeking out these savings because it's not a huge amount, it's a nice amount, and there's very little experience in how to find the best deal. So basically what we've been thinking about inside our company is that what you really need is not that complicated. You need to know the actual consumption of a household as we speak, which really we would need to know a history of energy consumption, also related to when that energy is consumed. Well, these days the hardware for that is really very cheap. You put an induction meter around the electricity cable that comes into the home and you connect that to some kind of IP address, and you can basically read that real time whenever you want. Then, of course, you would need an engine to compare contracts, energy contracts. Probably you'd like to know for each country what's the peak on, peak off structure of rates, and of course you need basically to make some information about what utilities are offering in terms of special deals, special contracts, and there's all kinds of deals being made. So you need to collect all that information in some kind of an intelligent database. But we would estimate that the total investment per dwelling could be quite reasonable. So of course you would say, well, the logical players to do this, because they have been obliged by law to implement smart meters anyway, and they have all this energy consumption data, so they can really do this almost for free. But you see a lot of these experimental initiatives taking place all over Europe, where utilities are trying to sell domotics to their clients, which include energy consumption advice. It includes a little bit of safety, a little bit of security, a little bit of comfort, like automated lighting. And what we see is that, a few exceptions aside, the success of these domotics being launched by utilities is breathtakingly low. If we talk to industry insiders, then they tell us what big utilities have spent in terms of marketing per client that actually bought one of these packages. And you would have helped the household a lot more just forking out the money directly to that household and forget about the marketing. It's outrageous. So consumers at the moment are not that interested in what the utilities are offering. And that might well be because one thing that utilities are not offering, in most cases, is to change utility as part of the package, because it's not a very logical approach to which basically brings us to one of the main considerations we had, that okay, basically we're talking about a supplier who's being asked to suggest other suppliers that might be cheaper than that specific company that's already selling the energy. And that's not a very likely thing to happen. As far as we think it's not very likely to happen. So, of course, we are quite well established as a player that also specifically works for social housing companies. And that's a logical, I would say, partner that comes to mind, because they also have a very trusted relationship with a lot of households, especially lower income households. They often also have a social remit to not just provide housing, but to go beyond that and to support their tenants in more than just a roof above their heads. They own 12% of the European building stock. They have a big organizational structure. Basically, they seem to be like an interesting player that could help out these low-income households to really start to become intelligent consumers who can shop around for their energy supply, really change from utility to another, if that makes sense financially. So basically, that's what we wanted to share. It's a very specific idea. It's not a holistic smart city vision. We have those in store as well, but I wanted to make it very concrete here. And like I said, we're very open to discuss this idea with anybody who thinks they can contribute to it, because we'd like to develop this kind of things into feasible business cases together with contributing partners. Thanks very much. You switch sides.
Switch places. Are there questions? Not yet. I have a few questions for you. ICT is also the backbone of your concept for social housing. It's certainly not for free. How to make sure that the cost is not skyrocketing during the progress of the project? And the second and third question is how to deal with the maintenance and everything that comes with it for the social housing part, because people live there who really don't have that high wages.
Yeah. No, I think in the projects we've been doing for ICT and social housing, let's say the first time we did a budget for a social housing system, I think we ended up at 3,000 euros per dwelling. And then later on we realized that the annual savings of a low-income household is maybe around 100 or 200 euros at most, because they spend very little on energy because they can't afford to. So 3,200 is not going to happen. So we realized that we shouldn't talk thousand, we should talk hundreds. If we're talking about 100 euro savings, then the whole system should probably not cost more than 100 euros, so you can reclaim it in 1 year. And that's, we think, feasible these days. The cost is going down very rapidly, so we should be very careful when putting a price tag on these things, because any price tag for 2 years ago is already vastly outdated today. Then about maintenance, or how to make sure that the system keeps working, I think there we need to make sure it's extremely simple. We should avoid that we try to put in a huge amount of sensors, a lot of compatibility issues. Again, we are involved in projects where we run into a whole mountain of terrible problems where ICT doesn't, it's impossible to make it work. You think, my God, it should be possible in 2013 to get this work smoothly, and they can't make it work. So we have to keep it very, very simple, so that it's not something that can go wrong every other week. And I think again that if you look at what is needed here, it doesn't need to be any complexity in there.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Luís Reis from, I always forget about it, CEIIA.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for having us in this conference. Thank you all for coming. My name is Luís Reis. I come from CEIIA. CEIIA is an engineering center in Portugal. I also work at Intel, which is a think tank in Portugal. And in a different approach than the previous users, I'm going to speak a bit about a conceptual approach at the issue of energy efficiency in mobility, using the technology that you can see in our booth here at both at the Smart Cities Expo and at EVS, which I would invite you to go to. But first of all, our belief is that technology is mostly an enabler. And before technology, you have the issue of concept and vision. And this is a bit what I'd like to share with you, how we came from, what is our concept, what is our vision for the smart city, and focusing specifically the case of transportation, and how we turn this concept into technology that you will be able to see outside. Just a few remarks. We started ICT implementation with the case of the Portuguese electric mobility network. We have been running pilots of more than 1,200 charging stations in Portugal. And this pretty much is a good illustration of the touch point between transportation and energy and the push towards higher efficiency in transportation. And it has been helping us enhance our conceptual approach at technology. So very conceptually, what do we want when we talk about energy efficiency in transportation? Well, first of all, we want to do more. We want actually to have more efficient transportation, to have higher rates of transportation for people. We want to have people informed, engaged, having access to more and more seamless mobility systems, but we also want to do better. We want to have inclusive mobility. Many times, or most of the times, mobility is thought under a top-down approach. You have public transportation and you have the others. And the private vehicle is public enemy number one. We believe that the future of efficient mobility management in cities relies on the ability to integrate the different means of transportation according to the different services that they include in a very dynamic model that includes users, operators, and the city itself. But of course, we want to do it with less. And we want to rationalize energy use and increase the use of renewable energy. This is a concern that we have in Portugal, which is a country where there was a very significant investment in the introduction of renewable energy. And we in fact, are able to say that with the case of electric mobility, we are one of the countries in the world where you actually have less impact from mobility, where it's more rational to use an electric vehicle and to promote the shift from conventional ICE transportation into EV transportation. Of course, in the end, what we want to do is reduce mobility costs for everybody, for the city as an ecosystem, for the operators and for the users, adjust supply to demand, bringing new initiatives and reduce the mobility footprint. But very easily said, very difficult to be done. You have a huge amount of services in the city that we can look as a part of an integration as a wide scope of services that one as a user can look at. And our approach has been to look at these services as a part of a combined service that can be perceived as a user and consumed as a user in units of mobility. And we have developed this concept at Intelli and CEIIA of a single mobility invoice, which is the ability to include just visionary. Imagine that we could include in a bill that we receive at the end of the month regarding transportation and mobility, all the mobility units that we consume along the month in that city, and that those units would bring externalities included, and that you would be pushed or you would be stimulated to adopt greener behavior as a daily user of mobility. Of course, we have been hearing about real-time. We tend to have static management in cities, but we are going towards real-time management, and this means bringing the vision of the city down to the level of the user in real time. This means establishing strategies for the city. We have seen a couple of indicators that we want to reach. This means integrating the diversity of systems under a user-centric approach. This means incorporating externalities, and very important, to involve users. Users are no longer a passive actor in the system. They are very active. They are prosumers of services, of energy, of information. We get to learn more and more. Future systems will rely more and more on the information that is provided by the single fact that users carry a cell phone, that every vehicle, every device that exists in the city is connected, perhaps to an IP that is defined by a city managed backbone. And this means the ability to look at a city, to look at a service operator, and from the side of the user also, to plan, to sense, to get in real-time information, to manage, and to act. If we think about service indicators, the most basic ones are indicators like this one. We want to promote the shift that leads to higher efficiency, meaning all that I said earlier, higher throughputs, but also lower impact. So how do you bring this down to the level of the user? And this is a bit of our vision, and this is a very basic and sketchy architecture of the system, of the ICT systems that we have designed, that we will be able to see at our booth, is the ability to work with the different operators in order to bring them into a backbone of services that can be brought down to the level of the users, using more and more the information that we get from the different devices. And we have an agnostic view or an abstractive view at devices. We started with the charging stations. We have developed our own mobility devices, small mobility devices, bikes. You'll be able to check our bike sharing system in our booth here at Smart Cities, our own four-wheeled vehicles. And joining all this information, you'll be able to enhance and produce new services, of course, that enable you to have management and planning at the level of the city and, of course, at the level of the grid. There are two different visions regarding the grid. When we speak about grid efficiency, do we believe that one day in the future the utilities will go through the meter that we have at home and manage our home, or are we going to be more active players in this decentralized management? We believe that users will be more active players, and that they use all means at their disposal for that. Of course, in order for this to work, we have to act in terms of the ability to generate systems that generate the ability to act in terms of real-time management, tariff management, being transportation tariffs, electricity tariffs, other tariffs in the city. Of course, with the challenge of bringing the impacts down to the user level. Different modes of transportation have different impact levels, different sources of energy, which we track in real time in Portugal. You see there, that chart on the very right is a snapshot of our system, which we track in real time, should be taken down to the user level. And our vision is to use systems, or to include in these systems the use of impacts that we generically, and of course we are working in this in depth, but we generically can call green credit models that you can use within this ecosystem that is connected to this system, and lead the city and the energy systems to act in real time. And you also can think of things like acting. We have talked about the disaster. What if electricity runs out? We believe that with these kinds of systems, with the system that we are developing, this concept, it's possible to induce users to adopt certain behaviors in the city by stimulating tariffs in real time, whether there is a, let's imagine this case where you have an excess of emissions in one region of the town, and you actually can act on tariffs, on tolls for entering that area, on parking fees, on public transportation fees, on incentives on car sharing or bike sharing, so that you leave your vehicle, take transportation, and then once you get levels down to whatever is your threshold, you put things back in place. This is, of course, only able, conceptually very interesting, only able if you have the technology and if you have the users. This is a very simple snapshot of some of our technologies that I'd like to share with you. We have an agnostic view, as I mentioned, at the different devices that are run in the city, whether it's a vehicle or a street light. We have an agnostic view and an open protocol and data access view on the integration of all these devices. For us, they're simply physical devices that enable the provision of a certain service for users in the city. And of course, just to wrap up, a smart city is only an efficient city if it's built by its users, if it relies on coherent models that integrate from the view of the city the different operators, the different services that users have at their disposal. This is the case of public transportation. This is the case of combining public transportation with private or public-led initiatives like bike sharing or car sharing. It's very interesting that Barcelona, as many cities in the world, have a very comprehensive ticketing scheme. But if you are in Barcelona, you can use the train, the bus, the metro, but you cannot use the bicycle. I was here over the weekend, and unfortunately I wasn't able to, well, it was raining too much anyway, but unfortunately I wasn't able to pick a bike and travel around the city. So we must take these things a step forward and talk not only of integrated mobility, but combined mobility, combining public services with private initiatives, or why not thinking about new companies that emerge and have innovative ideas and want to tap in these systems and enhance or extend the services that are disposed to people. And of course, we can think of this from the side of mobility. As I said, the electric vehicles is a specific case where you have a touch point between mobility and energy, and this is very interesting to show. But we believe that users will end up in the future by combining themselves in communities like we. One of the questions that was put was, what about energy brokerage? We also believe that there will be energy brokerage. So, as a wrap up, the challenges that we see are regard management models in the city, the issue of technology, very instrumental, user focus. These are the keys that we see for better mobility, better cities. Please join us at our booth here at Smart City Expo. You have the coordinates there, and also at EVS. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Sorry. No worries. Thank you. Does anyone have a question? Please.
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah. So I was wondering that have you planned, when you're making this integrated service cloud concept, were you wondering that the roles, so who could be this integrator, this MobiMe? Well,
something that represents the city. I think that there is no single recipe for these kinds of systems, you should have the city view, of course, but you should also be aware that perhaps the city is too much a narrow environment when you think of these kinds of systems. I'll give you the example of, I live in Lisbon. Lisbon is the central municipality of the municipal area. There are several municipalities around. Lisbon has a population of 500,000 people. The urban area has 3 million. So this only can be done if you go up a layer from the city and have a combined vision between different municipalities that share the same concerns. But you can go even a step higher. You would like, ideally, to have this kind of interoperability between two cities. Why not between Barcelona and Madrid, between Lisbon and Porto? So you also need to take this to the next level and work on harmonized principles that enable, let's call it, mobility, efficiency, interoperability on a larger scale. And this is a bit what we believe, and that we also believe that will be a key issue in European policy regarding ICT. It's an issue in EVs already, but it will be an important issue regarding ICT for transportation and energy efficiency in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Antonio Marqués from the ETRA group.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to have the chance to be here today and share some ideas about this subject of energy, technology, and cities. So I knew that I would be the only thing standing between you and your lunch. So I will try not to make it very long and to tell you a sort of story which hopefully is of your interest. Before starting with the presentation itself, I would like to acknowledge the contributions from my colleagues in Sodexo and Be Digital, which co-authored the paper that was accepted in the Congress and which have cooperated with us in some of the projects which I will be mentioning afterwards. First, let me tell you in a couple of words what we do at Grupo ETRA. If just quoting, I mean, I guess you remember this nice Humphrey Bogart's movie, the Maltese Falcon, when the guy says that that falcon is made of the stuff the dreams are made of. So I would like to quote him and say that we do the stuff smart cities are made of. So basically we provide advanced technology-based solutions in the fields of mobility, energy efficiency, security, and others in cities. Okay, that's primarily what we do. Now, going back to the idea of the presentation, rather than starting maybe with a very thick stuff, I prefer to step back a little bit and think about these three very interesting concepts of a city, technology, and energy, to see and think how intertwined they are and how they have been so throughout history, so that we can understand what the use of each of them is and what we actually need and want in our current cities in terms of improving energy efficiency and in terms of knowing better what to use technology for. So that's the exercise I try to do. So if you think about energy, city, and technology, it's sort of a chicken-egg problem, because what was first? Energy, technology, certainly not cities. I think that we all would agree on the fact that energy is an actual issue which comes with life and which is something we definitely need. And technology, be it rudimentary or sophisticated, has always been, let's say, something humankind has brought along. But if we continue in this walk through history, maybe we could move one step forward and then think about the emergence of cities. Okay, certainly when the first cities arose, yeah, one could think about a better organization, maybe not very sophisticated sources of technology, but at least we had, or they had, the organization to be able to focus this energy in individual or in ambitious undertakings so that actual achievements were possible. However, I mean, we all would agree on the fact that energy was terribly expensive, and that statistically we would all have more chances of being pushing the chariot rather than enjoying the benefits of energy. So it was not really a very convenient situation, I would say. The next stage would be brought forward by technology. Okay? Throughout history, people found better ways or more economic ways to produce energy. Still, I mean, the social fabric continued developing. If you think about wind and water, we also come to a very important conclusion, which is not only that renewables are around for a long time, but also on the fact that energy has been joined or together with transport since the early days of history. So this is still the case. We do believe that technology and energy, in a way, are different sides of the same coin. The actual breakthrough, okay, I'm glad we have somebody from Manchester here, came with the Industrial Revolution. I mean, that's like a turning point when energy becomes cheap. Okay, in that moment, it becomes possible the concept of a city, more or less as we understand it now. Okay, it's not just energy to move around. I would like to call your attention on the fact that we already have public lighting here, okay, which is another very important facet of the use of energy in cities, and this really starts looking, like I said, to something similar to what we call a city today. We've seen how, at this point, the social fabric has developed a lot. Actually, let's say in historical terms, energy is already cheap. I know many of you would disagree with that now, but historically speaking, we could say energy is already cheap. So the challenge now is not so much about organizing society, or it's not so much about improving the technology to produce energy. The challenge is more in the field of information. How we use information to make sure that the energy is used by those who need it, the energy is produced by those who can, the offer and the demand are satisfied in an optimal way. We can also use information to create value, not just by producing the technology, but by selling services around that. And we also exploit the social dimension in terms of the networking, which already was mentioned before me, and so on and so forth. Therefore, if we go now to let's say, a more or less modern city, it would look to something like this, where we have multiple actors around. Mobility is still a key issue. We have electromobility. We have, let's say, the concept of multimodality, very well developed, although still, of course, there is much to be done around that. I have my speech on mobility, but I didn't bring it with me today. We have the issue of public lighting as well, of course. And then we have a number of stakeholders which are around that, which include, I mean, from the city authorities, or the people or the institutions which are legally mandated, let's say, to keep the city running and supplied of energy and the services it needs, and to the citizens and voters. We have, of course, the energy producers, but also the intermediaries, the distributors, those which transform the energy into something which we can use in a form which we can use. We also have, let's say, if we zoom out parts of the city, we can find how we have here, for example, the issue of building management systems to optimize efficiency of the energy use and even production in buildings. That's an issue on its own. We have, once again, what I mentioned about mobility, the issue of mobility, the issue of public lighting, things which have a very, very direct impact on the quality of life of people. And of course, we have the legitimate expectation of the citizens to get information on the services they receive. I don't only want to get a good service, I want to know and have information about the service I'm receiving. So this is the arena in which we have to play, and when we think about what needs to be done, both in terms of product deployment and in terms of future research, this is, in my opinion, the kind of a scenario which we have to be looking at. And I'm talking from the perspective of a company which is a market leader both in Spain and internationally in the field of mobility and energy efficiency in cities. This means that we are at the same time providing turnkey solutions to cities, but we are also involved in more than 50 research projects, many of them at European level, where we are defining what we expect to be the technologies and the scenarios of the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, now let me revisit this scenario I depicted and mapping on top of it some of the projects we are working in. These are FP7 research projects in which in some of them Sodexo and BE Digital, as I mentioned before, are our partners. ETRA is the coordinator of all of them, and in all of them, I think excepting one, the city of Barcelona is participating, hosting one pilot. I could start by Project Nobel. I mean, this is the one which is not in Barcelona, but anyway. This is a project about energy efficiency and public lighting and I will find the word, auctioning of energy between users, so that peaks and in demand and offer can be compensated by the users themselves. This other project is BEAMS, which stands for Buildings Energy Advanced Management System, and this is a very interesting project, not only because of the subject, but because of the fact that we have a pilot in the football stadium of the Barça. So this is really a flagship project on facility management for us. We have Molecules project, which is a project on electromobility. In this project, we are not just managing vehicle recharging or the energy management of the process. In this project, we are also integrating the electric vehicle as one additional player in the city mobility. I mean, we don't want to have, let's say, a new strange animal, which is the electric car, which is left in the middle of a city and nobody knows what to do with it. We want to integrate it smoothly into the city mobility system. We have Besos project, where we have pilots in Barcelona and Lisboa, as you can identify from the logo. In this project, what we are defining is an ecosystem, which I will illustrate in the next slide, about how all these different players can interact, can provide information, and can make business around energy and get services around energy in the city. And last but not least, we have SmartKai project, which is a project which is more addressed to public authorities so that they can have access to a sort of cockpit where they have indicators on how the contractors in the city are performing. Okay, so that if we have somebody which is running the public lighting in the city for the municipality can have, in a quick glimpse, an overview through the key indicators of how the performance of the contract or the performance of the service delivered is working, and so that contracts can be supervised and so on. The whole bunch of these things should take us to an environment like this one, where we can have a trustworthy energy service platform where the different stakeholders interact, which gives to everyone what everyone needs. To the public authority and facility owners, it will give them the possibility of define service level agreements, the possibility of auditing KPIs. To the business which are providing services to the city, they will be able to get business intelligence to take well-funded decisions to reduce costs and optimize the performance of the service. And the same would apply to the rest of the ecosystem. And of course, last but not least, the whole thing does not make sense if the user, if the citizen is not involved. And this is contemplated as well, including some applications which should induce behavioral changes to the citizens if this helps balancing the load of the network and improving, of course, the bill by the end of the month for the citizens. And I think I will be finishing now. I mean, well, this is a nice photograph of Barcelona. This is how a small city could look like. I mean, we don't want impressive things. We want a nice, livable place where everybody has access to energy, transport, and by the end of the day, quality of life is better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.